So Fox News host Stuart Varney did what he always does on his show, which is he pretends that billionaires and the mega wealthy are victims. So he's going to talk about Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, and how much money he made. He's going to say, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are not going to like this. So let's take a look and then I'll respond.
Here, it's a news item which is really going to annoy Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren. Because we've now just found out how much Tim Cook made I think last year should be correct. How much did he make last year? Big bucks, right, Laura?
You know, he deserves it. He deserves it. He's the head of Apple. $98.7 million, up 500%.
Wait a minute. Tell that to Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. He deserves $100 million.
He's already committed almost all of it to charity, so tell them that, too.
Okay.
You want the breakdown? Because his base salary is not that high. It's $3 million. He got $12 million for hitting specific targets, about $1.5 million for travel, security, all that. Here's the big one. $82.4 million in stock awards, including the first one ever. He's been CEO for a decade, the first one for performance. He got an equity award.
Okay, when he takes delivery of that stock, he'll have to pay personal income tax on it.
Yes.
That'll be, with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, you'll be looking at 50%, but that's another story.
Yes. First of all, he's not going to take delivery of that. He made $98 million in 1 year. If only $3 million of that is his actual compensation, the rest of that is just wealth gain. So that adds to his net worth. He's not actually going to take that out. So he's not going to get taxed 50% on it. That's a lie. That's a lie. ProPublica did the breakdown of, hey, here are the billionaires, here's their true tax rate. And their true tax rate is like 3% in some cases and 0% in other cases and 1% in other cases. They always pay less as a percentage than their frickin' secretaries do. And Warren Buffett issued that challenge a decade ago and said, I'll give $1 million of my own money to any CEO who can show that their secretary pays a lower tax rate than they do. And nobody collected because nobody could, because all the CEOs were paying a lower tax rate. So he's just misleading you on purpose. But even if that was taxed at 50%, I would file that under based. Why? Because $50 million in 1 year going to one person, I think you're going to be all right. But this is what he does. He acts like, well, the wealthy and the billionaires and the corporations, they're victims of an oppressive government. They're victims of an oppressive government. Well, what about the more than half of workers in the U.S. that make $30,000 a year or less? It's not because they're not working hard. It's not because they're not trying. It's because the system does not reward the kind of work that they do. What about the 80% of Americans that live paycheck to paycheck? What about the 30 million Americans who don't have health insurance? What about the 45,000 people who die because they don't have basic health care? I can go on and on with these statistics. What about the over 500,000 homeless Americans? What about the homeless veterans in America? You're concerned about the people in the country who you should concern the least about? They're fine. They're fine. And it's not a meritocracy. They didn't just earn it. And by the way, a lot of the stuff they said there is not true. One of them just says he deserves it. What does that even mean, he deserves it? What does that mean, he deserves it? Then the lie of, well, he's giving it all to charity. A lot of these CEOs do this goofy thing. I don't even know if Tim Cook is one of these, but they do this goofy thing of they say, I will only take a salary of $1. Or they say, I'm going to donate all of my salary to charity. And that makes the media, the gullible idiots in the media, who probably are lying on purpose, there's probably propaganda that they're in on as well. They act like, look at this, look at how benevolent and altruistic the rich are. Isn't charity wonderful? But again, what they don't tell you is that's just their salary. They're not talking about the actual gain in wealth that they have. So if you give $3 million, but you keep $98 million or $95 million of the $98 million, is that really like, oh, you're really looking out for poor people and people who are hurting? Of course not. Of course not. Jesus Christ, this is such shameless propaganda. Now, why don't we go ahead and take a look? This is from Thinking Now. Let's take a look at how Tim Cook and Apple really create all that wealth.
Yi Yating was a worker at the Foxconn factory as a 24-year-old. He is now diagnosed with leukemia. He claims that the toxic chemical benzene, used extensively in the manufacturing of iPhones, was the cause of it. The documentary further details the horrific reality of the world's largest electronics supplier. Apple went on to ban the use of hazardous chemicals from its final assembly of the iPhone in 2014, but it is still permitted for use in the early production stages. In 2010, the Longhua assembly line was plagued with a string of suicides. Workers began killing themselves in turn. Worker after worker threw themselves off the towering dorm buildings, usually in broad daylight. These were tragic displays of desperation and protest at the working conditions found inside. There were 18 reported suicides that year, with 14 confirmed deaths. 20 more workers were talked down by other employees of the company. The epidemic caused a huge media sensation, with the factory and its working conditions in full view of the world. Apart from the already shambolic corporation response of installing anti-suicide nets around the windows, Apple also made new workers sign pledges that stated that they would never attempt to kill themselves. Many people in and around the factory have given several interviews further documenting how bad it was. It is not a good place for human beings, according to the various workers and normal folks in and around the factory site. Workers have long lamented that none of the work being trumpeted by the media was actually being done. The conditions inside are apparently as bad as ever.
So the Foxconn factory that makes the Apple products in China, they overwork them to no end. They underpay them. There was an epidemic of suicides, and in order to stop that, they made them sign a pledge, I'm not going to commit suicide, and also added nets outside their windows. So if they jump off, they just land in the net. Look, I'm a hypocrite just like everybody else. I have an iPhone. These issues are systemic. We have to address them at the policy level. That's the only way. And so, people always say, oh, you can't make the factories here because then you have to pay the workers too much and it'd be too difficult and the way the supply chain works and nonsense. If there's a will, there's a way. You can absolutely find a way to make these sorts of products here, or at the very least, clean up the way business is done, have stricter rules and regulations, have overtime pay, have a max number of hours that people can work, mandate a certain quality of life. Any government has the ability and the authority to implement basic regulations that look out for working people. So we need to do that. This is how Apple and Tim Cook makes their money. This is how they do it. Now, I'm not saying you ban iPhones or whatever. I'm saying as much as is humanly possible, do not outsource jobs, have good-paying jobs here in the U.S., good-paying union jobs that build various products, and also have rules and regulations and labor protections that are not just here in the U.S., but they need to do it overseas as well whenever we do have, trade agreements. Need to build into those trade agreements protections for workers, whether it's through permanent normal trade relations with China, NAFTA, or whatever trade agreement we want to talk about. That's how you fix the problem. And then also, of course, to get back to the main issue here, have better tax laws in the United States of America. You have to, there was a report that came out after the Trump tax cuts, billionaires for the first time in history paid an effectively lower tax rate than working people. You got to change that. You got to raise taxes on the wealthy. You have to do it to actually create a meritocracy, because what we have right now isn't a meritocracy. What we have right now is a rigged system that helps billionaires and corporations and screws everybody else. That's why income and wealth inequality is higher than even the Gilded Age at this point. And Stuart Varney is a propagandist on Fox Business trying to make you think, no, if anything, billionaires and corporations and CEOs like Apple's Tim Cook, he's a victim of big, bad, mean Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Aren't Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren so stupid for wanting to look out for working people and tax wealthy people a fair amount where they will still be phenomenally wealthy, but maybe not so wealthy that the people who work for them don't have health care or can't afford food or need to rely on the social safety net or what have you? Oh my God. Doesn't matter how much ruthless exploitation there is out there, Stuart Varney will come rushing to the defense of billionaires and act like they are the ones who are the victims. They are not the victims. They bought the system, they own the system, they rigged the rules in their favor, and he's hiding the truth from you. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.